This is a kind of a cynical town sometimes. And there was a lot of talk about, gosh, maybe the president's last 2 years weren't going to be so exciting. I think we've put the lie to that notion. And the notion that cynicism is the right way to operate, I think, has been blown out of the water by the events, really, of the last several months, particularly this summer.
That's why we do what we do.
I had been working on health reform my entire adult career. So I was sitting there staring at the blog, staring at my computer, staring at my email when the news came through.
You could feel the whole building holding its breath because we weren't expecting it that day.
And I'm reading it and I'm not believing it. So when you think about what happened on that decision day, no longer was it about partisan fighting. Now it was just simply about how do we make sure on a daily basis people have access to coverage, they can afford coverage, that coverage is high quality, and it indeed is no longer a law, but integrated into the fabric of America.
We finally declared that in America, health care is not a privilege for a few, but a right for all. So this was a good day for America.
Friday morning, we were all gathered in Dennis McDonough's office for our morning senior staff meeting. And so much had happened. We'd already had the court decision come down just the day before about the Affordable Care Act. And we really weren't expecting any more news as early as Friday.
And an aide brought in a note to Valerie Jarrett, and she opened the note and her face lit up.
And it said, marriage equality, we win 5-4. And so I said, my goodness, we weren't expecting it, it came down. And so the room went up in applause, and several of us went down to tell the president, and he came down and gave amazing remarks in the Rose Garden and changed the world.
Sometimes there are days like this, when that slow, steady effort is rewarded with justice that arrives like a thunderbolt.
Well, there was obviously grief and yet a celebration. And I think what was clear to me when I first walked in and saw the size of the crowd that was there was just how revered Reverend Pinckney was and how much he meant to the community. You could just feel the connection between the president and the audience, and the crescendo was when they responded so quickly to his first few words from Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace.
I knew that week when the president gave that incredible eulogy in South Carolina. The healthcare decision came down, the gay marriage decision came down. I knew that we were about done with Cuba, and I knew that Iran was coming, and it almost felt like it was over to us, after these dramatic domestic and social breakthroughs. We did not know we were going to get this deal done. If you remember that the team was out in Vienna for weeks. Secretary Kerry was abroad in one place for a longer period of time than any Secretary of State's gone anywhere. I was able to go into the Oval Office with Susan Rice and tell the president that we were going to have a deal, that this was going to get done. We learned that the deal was going to be complete the day before, although that wasn't public, that afternoon. Because Vienna is 6 or 7 hours ahead, we had to spend that night getting ready for that rollout, writing his remarks almost overnight, because, again, they were going to announce it in the afternoon in Vienna. So it started very early. We saw him right before he gave the remarks, and then afterwards, we all were able to reflect on the fact that, this is, actually what he was going through is all the people who no longer work here. That there are people across the last 6.5 years who were part of this. And so we were actually talking to him about all the people who were part of this who weren't able to be there that day. There are very few days where you come to work and history happens. The day that our embassy opened in Havana formally and the Cubans raised their flag over an embassy here and again played the Cuban and American national anthems, I think was a day that marked in many respects the end of a period of history. Cuba-U.S. relations were a symbol of the Cold War, the kind of the last remaining symbol of the Cold War. You have both the embassy openings with Cuba and the Iran nuclear deal take place in that proximity is a fairly remarkable testament to the fact that you can realize that promise of engagement and that it takes time.
For me this summer, the personal highlight is without a doubt his visit to El Reno prison in Oklahoma. First of all, he's the first president to ever visit a federal prison. It was huge. It was absolutely, it was amazing. We've seen this problem with mass incarceration around the country, and we have about 2.2 million people who are incarcerated. But we have to understand that our jails should be places where we actually make people better, where we go back to the idea of rehabilitation. And you can't send that message without actually being there and seeing what is happening there.
I think what we saw this summer were the results of, in some cases, decades of work of people who were committed to a cause, who believed that if they just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it, that what might come down would seem like a thunderbolt, but it was truly work that had taken so long to come to fruition. And so it was very validating to the president's whole philosophy about grassroots efforts and hopefully encouraging people to continue to fight vigilantly to make our country that more perfect union.
West Wing Week.